that they beat it by so handily in the third quarter that they didn't boost the full year more, which means they're not going to beat the fourth quarter from where it is. Maybe. For the next hour, we have one of the most outspoken members of Congress with us. Let's welcome Representative Ron Paul of Texas. Congressman, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
When you sat down, I said, wow, you have, and you know it, you've got some of the most fervent, zealous followers on the planet, right?
Well, I guess if you say so.
And you acknowledged that and said, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse at times, right?
Yeah, sometimes, you know, anybody that supports you, some people think you're responsible for everything they say, think, and do. And that can be awkward at times.
So you do feel
But for overall, I mean, if you look at all the supporters and the views I present, we basically agree, you know, about monetary policy. And
how did it happen? You said it started kind of slowly, and then you ran for president, and it just mushroomed when you ran for president.
Kind of slowly means that 30 years was kind of slow.
Yeah.
Because I was motivated to go into politics because I wanted to talk about monetary policy, and that came out of the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. I thought that was a significant event and would usher in a new age of a dollar reserve standard with no backing of the currency, and it would lead to a huge bubble. And I believe the huge bubble is here, and we're in the midst of a big correction, which is going awkwardly. So I was motivated to run, and I talked about that. I got on the banking committee, and I've been in and out of Congress. I haven't stayed in Congress all that time, but I've been back since '97. But I always stayed on financial services or banking committee to talk about this issue because I think the monetary issue is so key, because I believe and sincerely believe that the Federal Reserve is the engine of the business cycle. They artificially create money out of thin air. They set interest rates, so we've given up on the market on one half of all our transactions. So if we believe in markets, and most people who listen to your station, you know, they believe in free markets.
They used to.
They believe in free markets, but it's been accepted for decades that markets can't set interest rates. I mean, even now, if it is true what I say, that we got in this trouble because interest rates were too low too long, which even Geithner has admitted that, you know, too low too long, and things got out of whack. But how are they trying to correct it? Keeping interest rates very, very low for a very long time and doing exactly the same thing. And I think it's a fruitless adventure, and it won't end well. And in time, the only thing it can resolve is the devaluation of the currency. And that's continuous, although today or tomorrow it might go up a bit. But we in the Congress can't keep spending trillions and trillions of dollars and expecting the Fed to come to our rescue. So it's already very politicized. Congress gets to spend. If you like war, spend on war. If you like welfare, spend on welfare. Run up the deficits. And even if the deficits are harmful and gives you a crisis, more deficits. So now they're talking about raising the national debt. You know, this year, you know, before the year's end, by $2 more trillion. And nobody seems to blink an eye on this. And this has to, on the long time, lead to devaluation of currency. And since I've been thinking about this from 1971, the trends are pretty definite. I mean, investors and all have to look at today and tomorrow and next week. But I mean, if you look at long-term trends, it's not very good. And I work on the assumption that a weak currency doesn't help anybody. I mean, if you want people to save, is where capital should come from, you want people to be encouraged to put their money aside, save it so other people can borrow it, and that's where true capital comes from. But if the money's losing its value, it just distorts the whole process, and we end up with a non-market-oriented system, and it gets out of whack, malinvestment, too much debt, and there needs corrections, and we're in the midst of trying to allow this correction.
Why do you say this correction's going awkwardly?
Well, because, I mean, New York Times today talked about, you know, talking to people who are unemployed. and that doesn't look like it's improving. I think it's going to get a lot worse. And another person I've talked to said, well, the housing problems aren't over. They're not behind us. And they said that the commercial property problems haven't really even started. And Congress doesn't have the vaguest idea what to do. You know, they just say, spend more money. Paul Krugman came out and said, well, we need another stimulus program, another $2 trillion. But if that's the case, we shouldn't have to work. Just let the Fed do it. If the Fed gives us money and we spend it, that pushes up the GDP. You know, it's magic.
So I was going to ask, you know, we took the peg off the dollar at the end of the 1960s, early 1970s, and yet the dollar over this period of time, despite the buildup in debt, despite the Fed dominance of rate setting, the dollar's been ranging in a kind of a sideways pattern ever since. There hasn't been a continual devaluation. It's within a very well-controlled sideways.
Compared to what? Compared to other currencies?
Well, I mean, you know, it was pegged prior to the 1970s, and really since 1970, it's been still sort of in a sideways trend, even though we've had a buildup in debt.
I measure it by the purchasing power. I was in medicine in 1968 when these things were happening, and I charged $5 for an office call. If I were in practice today, if you came to me, it might be $100, maybe even more. In New York, I bet it's more. You go to the doctor. So I would say the dollar has lost a lot of purchasing power, and therefore the dollar is weakening. But our problem is we look at the value of our dollar against other currencies and compare it to the euro. We have our problems, and we now are nationalizing our industries, but Europe probably is further along, and they have the same monetary system. So a person like myself will say, well, you know, I don't think the dollar's going to hold up. All I know is let me learn how to trade currencies, and I'll go into the euro and then over to the yen. Long term, and for permanency, you know, it doesn't work for the average person. Just the sophisticated know how to do that. But, you know, you can't. I don't like the idea that you measure the value of the dollar against something else that's losing value too. So when all the other currencies are bad, but even that, the dollar has lost, you know, even against other currencies. If you look at the dollar long time, the last 30, 40 years, it has gone down. And traditionally, up until 1971, the value of the dollar was always measured in terms of gold. 1971, when we broke the link to gold, it was a major event. We devalued because we were on the fixed rates. We devalued 8%, went from $35 an ounce to $38. That was a big event. That's what caught my attention. I said, we're off course here. And, you know, since 1913, the Fed had a dollar that was worth $20 an ounce. And today, it's been devalued 98%. I mean, so the Fed has not done a very good job on giving us stability of currency and stability of prices. So long term, it doesn't look good. And I look at, say, savings. I want people to save. I want people to plan. That's where I think capital comes from. It shouldn't come out of a printing press. So how many people in this country would say, you know, they just got married and they have a child, and in 15, 20 years they want to send them to college? How many people would buy a long-term bond and say, oh, okay, let's buy a government bond, you know, a 20-year bond? Well, the cost of education is going to do this, and the bonds, the purchase of your money is going to go down. You say, oh, no, it's just 2%. But 2% is theft. It shouldn't lose anything. Yep. On sound money, the purchasing power of money goes up.
All right, Rod, we're going to take a break. Your mic just fell off, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back.
We've got a lot more to talk about with the congressman today. In fact, still to come this morning on Squawk.
One of the great strengths of our nation is independent Fed, and this idea that's coming out of the House, which is populist fervor, pandering populism is what it is absolutely wrong.
That was Senator Judd Gregg responding to Congressman Ron Paul's proposal in the financial reform bill to audit the Fed and strip away power. We're going to be seeing Senator Gregg in the next half hour. And right after this quick break, former Fed Governor Rick Mishkin, he'll be facing off with Congressman Paul over the power of the central bank. It's been a huge debate on the Hill. Squawk Box will be right back.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. First in business worldwide.
There's nothing like a family get-together during the holidays. Good food, fun, and a little sibling rivalry. Introducing the Cadillac Season's Best event. See your Cadillac dealer for attractive offers. From our family to yours, Season's Best from Cadillac.
Bull market or bear, traders are always hungry for ideas.
Trading's all about strategy. And strategy is all about information.
Heat mapping shows me where the money's moving.
2,500 stocks.
One quick glance.
That's where the action is.
Look at this, Pattern Matcher.
Pattern Matcher spots technical patterns automatically. It's like pattern radar.
TD Ameritrade. Built by traders, for traders.
This is what I need.
Trade commission free for 30 days. Plus, get $100 cash when you open an account.
And Barclays is America's #1 research house. I like your tie.
Thank you.
It's breathtaking.
Go inside with CNBC Originals. Tonight, starting 8 Eastern, The New Age of Walmart. At 9, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, Keeping America Great. At 10, Dirty Money, The Business of High-End Prostitution. CNBC, first in business worldwide.
Is America's gambling mecca making a comeback? Live from Las Vegas, see how developers, casinos, and home builders are turning the odds in their favor. Is it worth a wager for investors? Betting on Vegas, all day today on CNBC.
I'm Roger Teeter. In my 40s, I suffered from chronic back pain. I tried everything to find relief. Nothing really worked. Then I found inversion. The Teeter Hang-Ups offers natural decompression that can help to restore nutrients to the discs, reduce nerve pressure, provide realignment, and relax tense, tired muscles.
Call now to try the Teeter Hang-Ups for only $14.95 and receive the 30 Days to a Better Back program free.
Unlike any stretch you can do on your own, a few minutes a day on the Teeter decompresses all weight-bearing joints, promoting improved function and flexibility. That deep stretch leaves me feeling relaxed and rejuvenated. Even though I'm in my 70s, I feel great.
An extremely easy piece of equipment to operate, and the relief that it brings me is well worth the 3 to 5 minutes.
Give it a try and discover why over 1 million people worldwide have put their trust in Teeter Hang-Ups.
All right, welcome back to Squawk Box, everyone. We're counting down to the release of the Producer Price Index. That's just 15 minutes away. Right now, though, the futures are showing a little bit of pressure if things continue in this vein at the open. Right now, you're talking about the Dow futures down by about 31 points below fair value. Our next guest has been very vocal in his opposition to Ron Paul's proposal to allow audits of the Fed's monetary policy. Joining us right now from Irvington, New York, is Rick Mishkin, who is a former Federal Reserve Board governor and a Columbia University professor right now. Also, our guest host for this hour, Republican Representative Ron Paul from Texas. And Rick, welcome to the party. Before we get things started, why don't we just ask the congressman to lay out a brief summation of his proposal to audit the Fed?
In the 1970s, they made an effort to audit the Fed, but instead what they did, they put more restrictions on auditing the Fed. There's always a token auditing of the Fed, and that still goes on, but it never allows you to find out what they really do, what transactions they do. So mine removes all those restrictions so that we can find out what kind of agreements they've made with international governments, with other central banks and financial institutions, and all corporations. And also find out what they do at the discount window.
And then do what with that information?
Well, I think the American people want to know what's happening because there's a mess. And the most important thing is they're looking at the Fed, and that's my intent, is to direct attention to the Fed because, as I described earlier, that's the source of the business cycle. So that information is very important. But in this day and age, you know, the TARP funds, people understand that some people got bailed out, some people didn't get bailed out. But some people got bailed out with the Fed operation, too, and other people's were ignored. Some people got some money for it, and some people got top dollar, and some people got less. And we deserve to know. We have a responsibility to know who got bailed out and at what price.
Professor Mishkin, your concern about that proposal?
So the issue here is not that, in fact, we need to have accountability of the Federal Reserve and more transparency. I've been an advocate of that for a long time in my academic writings. The question is, you have to do it right. And from my viewpoint, the Paul Grayson Amendment to the Financial Reform Bill is just bad legislation. It has unintended consequences that could be very, very problematic. So the issue here is that you do want to have information from the Fed, but the question is, you want it done on a regular basis with a framework which actually gets the right information and also focus on the long term. The problem with this legislation is that it's very ad hoc, that any time that the Federal Reserve, and this is going to be very critical, by the way, going down the road, because as Representative Paul has mentioned, he's worried about inflation and debasing of the currency. If the Federal Reserve, when it gets to the situation where, in fact, it has to raise interest rates, there's going to be a lot of second guessing. It's going to be many people are going to be upset about it. if under this legislation, what can be done is that a congressperson can go and request an audit of the Fed on this particular decision. That's not the right way to do quote auditing of the Fed and getting information on terms of what the Fed is doing. Other countries, by the way, have done this and have increased the scrutiny of central banks, and they've done it right. I was involved as an outsider in terms of doing a report for the Swedish Parliament on the Riksbank, the central bank in Sweden. They now have set that up to be something done every 4 years. There is a framework that can focus on the long run, get the information that people need to have, because it is true that the central bank must operate in the interest of the public. This bill does not get what I think that the Representative Paul should want to happen, which is an accountable Fed that actually keeps inflation under control. And indeed, if this legislation passed, I think that there'd be very big concern in the market whether the Federal Reserve is going to be able to resist the pressures to not, and therefore not raise interest rates when it needs to. And then we're going to go back to the great inflation, something that I don't think any American wants to have, including Representative Paul.
Congressman?
Well, I think it's a misinterpretation of the bill. Like, he indicated that, you know, if there's a Federal Reserve Board meeting, we would go into next door and audit it. You know, it explicitly prohibits that. Matter of fact, it's a very weak bill. You can't even look or ask any questions until 6 months later. And their argument is that this will politicize it, that Congress will be involved. Well, it's already politicized. I mean, some people get advantages, other people don't. It's political in the sense that Federal Reserve Board chairmen like to be renominated, so they manipulate the economy in order to try to have things doing well at particular times. It's politicized because it accommodates the deficits. Congress, you know, depends on it, and they monetize the debt. This whole idea that if we had our way and we knew what was going on, there would be inflation, or they would keep interest rates, you know, the Congress would want interest rates down too low. Well, how could it get any lower? Well, I mean, how did we get into this mess, and how are we trying to get out of it?
I guess
interest
the
rates
argument
at 1%.
is if congressmen who are up for election every 2 years, would you be in a position where significant numbers of Congress would want to keep those rates?
But they don't have any
low or
control.
Zero.
This bill has nothing to do with this. It has a gross distortion. They didn't read the bill. They don't understand the bill. It explicitly states that you can't do this, and it has nothing. I couldn't get 316 co-sponsors of this because, you know, progressives they always, you know, they do want a lot of money supply. I want less. So we had no agreement, no intent. In order for me to get a broad spectrum of individuals to support this bill, I had to make sure that this was just transparency, has nothing to do with it. And the other argument that is made frequently is, oh, you know, if we find out that so-and-so went to the discount window, that's going to hurt the bank. Well, if the insurance happened to be private, and they might want you to know about the bank, and it would be that evidence, that information would want to come out. But this would only come after 6 months. And besides, the Federal Reserve shouldn't be there for hiding information and protecting bad banks as a large group. That's how you get big bubbles and all banks into trouble.
Professor?
So the issue here is not that, you know, there is a concern. I think the American public does want to know what's going on. The problem is the devil's in the details here. That there is actually a serious problem in terms of institutions that take loans. If that information comes out too quickly, they're not willing to take out the loans. This actually problem was a very serious one for the discount window. It wasn't being used at all. It's one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve, and I was there when this happened, decided to set up new facilities so that this so-called stigma problem would disappear. And in fact, those lending facilities then did work.
What was wrong
with banks?
What was wrong when banks didn't want to go to the discount window? What was the problem that was created?
Particularly because when you're in a situation where you have a crisis of the type that we had, that banks, if they do not get liquidity, in fact, banks frequently are not willing to sufficiently protect themselves when bad things happen. A big problem during this crisis was that banks did not want to raise enough capital because it would dilute the shareholders. Well, the problem was they didn't get enough capital, and look eventually what happened. And we had a system that actually folded up. So the problem here is that if you have transparency, which doesn't allow you to do the job, there's a problem. You do need to have transparency on a long-run basis, and in fact, one of the issues that you mentioned, which I think is very important, is that politicians do think it's more short-term. because they need to. They have to get elected. That's the democratic system. And indeed, one of the things that a tremendous amount of research and economic theory indicates is that insulating the central bank from short-term political pressure is critical to success. When that hasn't happened, that's when you get the debasing of the currency that Representative Paul is so worried about. That happened in the 1970s, for example. It's happened in many other countries. One of the big trends throughout the world has been towards more independent central banks, but also setting up procedures so those central banks are accountable. And we've seen that done elsewhere. It's been done right. I think that there are increases in transparency that the Congress could require that would be very helpful. I think that a more serious process of finding out what the Fed does and having it explain itself could be done. But this bill does not achieve that. It's a bill that actually will harm the ability of the Fed to do its job, and at this particular point in time, that could be disastrous.
Tell me specifically what in the bill has you most concerned. I mean, you guys seem to be talking over each other on some levels.
Right. It's the ad hoc nature of the process of auditing. So, first of all, there is a lot of auditing that goes on into the Federal Reserve in terms of the GAO does run audits. For example, how the Fed spends its money is subject to scrutiny by the GAO, and rightfully so, because you don't want a central bank wasting taxpayer money. So that kind of thing does go on. The issue here is that, that when we look at monetary policy, we want to ask, is the framework that the central bank is using one that produces good outcomes for the American public? And that's something that you want to set up in terms of regular reports, where the Fed has to report to Congress on a regular basis. I actually would like to see the reporting done not twice a year, but 4 times a year. That we'd also, I think, could beef up the scrutiny and the seriousness of the questioning of the Federal Reserve by, in fact, having independent experts as part of that process. There are a lot of things that could be done which could improve the transparency of the Federal Reserve, could improve the accountability of the Federal Reserve, but not subjected to short-term pressure.
Congressman,
and the problem here, that this is a case of where there is a lot of hostility to the Fed. Representative Paul has on his website selling End the Fed T-shirts. I think that this bill is actually disingenuous. It does not focus on what needs to be done.
Is what that is, and the Fed. Those are just cool T-shirts.
Actually, the T-shirts look pretty nice.
Are you suggesting that if your bill had been in place, and if it had been law since, say, the beginning of Greenspan's tenure, that rates would not have been kept as low for so long?
No, but it might have indirectly changed things. They might have realized the Fed was serving special interests and maybe helping some people and not others.
On their own, or because Congress put pressure on them to change?
No, I don't think so. I think on their own, because we don't know what they do. And the fact that everything is on the books, if they extend a loan, I mean, they can create trillions of dollars, and we don't know. And they say, oh, no, we know every single thing we need to know. Well, then they should open up the books and let us know. And this whole idea of timing is where he gets it wrong.
We have to go. We got some breaking news. Rick, thank you for your time. We got 2 key inflation reports, producer price index, and some other numbers coming up after a short break.